The air was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that pressed down on your chest and made every breath feel louder than it should be. It wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence of abandonment, of forgotten places where no living thing should linger. When I agreed to go with the team down into the decommissioned nuclear base, I thought it would be nothing more than a strange adventure, something to brag about later when we were back above ground. The place had been sealed off for decades, left to rot under layers of concrete and dirt. Locals whispered about shadows seen around the old entrances, and some swore they heard voices echoing up through the ventilation shafts at night. But we didn't believe any of that. At least, not then. The group was made up of 5 of us, curious thrill-seekers with just enough experience in urban exploration to think we knew what we were doing. There was Mason, the one who organized the trip, always chasing danger like it was the only thing that made him feel alive. His girlfriend, Leah, came too, quiet, careful, always the one carrying extra supplies just in case. Then there was Tyler, loud and brash, more interested in filming everything for his YouTube channel than in staying safe. His camera never left his hand. Ava, our rational anchor, kept trying to convince us that breaking into an abandoned military site wasn't a smart idea, but she still followed us. And then there was me. I was just along for the ride, the friend who never wanted to be the one left out, even when my gut told me this was a mistake. The entrance was hidden in the woods, a massive steel hatch sunk into the ground, rusted at the edges but still imposing. Mason had done his research. He found out that the base had once been used during the Cold War, an underground bunker where nuclear warheads were stored and where soldiers had been stationed around the clock. But in the late 80s, something happened. The official records said the base was decommissioned due to structural instability. Locals, though, told a different story. They whispered about accidents, about soldiers going mad inside, about strange things that were never fully explained. When Mason pried the hatch open with a crowbar, a wave of stale air rushed out, carrying the faintest trace of something metallic and sour. Tyler shoved his camera into the opening, grinning as if he'd struck gold. "This is it, guys. This is how we go viral. Nobody else has filmed this place inside." We climbed down the ladder, one by one, our flashlights cutting thin beams through the thick blackness. The deeper we went, the colder it became. The walls were damp, condensation dripping down the corroded steel. By the time our feet hit the concrete floor, we were swallowed in darkness so absolute it felt alive, like a living thing pressing against our skin. The first corridor stretched endlessly, lined with rusted pipes and peeling paint. Warning signs still clung to the walls: authorized personnel only, radiation hazard, and no entry beyond this point. Tyler kept laughing nervously, pointing his camera at every sign as if mocking the long-forgotten rules would make them less ominous. But then Leah pointed out something none of us wanted to acknowledge. The walls weren't just peeling. In places, they were smeared with something darker. At first, I thought it was mold, thick patches of black spreading in strange vein-like patterns. But when my flashlight hit it just right, the sheen told me it was something else. Something that had once been wet. Blood. Old, dried, and caked into the walls. We told ourselves it couldn't be. That it was rust, or water damage, or anything else that kept us from imagining the worst. But in that moment, unease settled over us like a heavy blanket. The base wasn't empty. Not entirely. We pressed on, because Mason refused to admit defeat. He wanted to find the warhead storage, the control rooms, the places that still whispered of history. But the deeper we went, the stranger things became. The air grew thick, not just with dust, but with a smell that made the back of my throat burn, like rot, like something left too long in the dark. The silence wasn't complete anymore either. Every so often, I swore I heard something: faint footsteps, the scrape of metal against concrete, the drip of water where there shouldn't be any. But whenever I froze and listened harder, the sound was gone, as if the base itself was mocking me. It was Leah who found the first room. The door was heavy, sealed with a rusted wheel lock, but she managed to force it open. Inside was a barracks, rows of metal bunks, rotting mattresses still in place. Personal items were scattered everywhere: boots, dog tags, even a few notebooks swollen from damp. But what froze us in our tracks wasn't the abandoned belongings. It was the fact that some of the beds still looked occupied. Shapes lay under tattered blankets, motionless. For a heartbeat, I thought they were bodies, long since rotted to bone. But when Mason pulled back one of the covers, It was nothing but a husk, a uniform stuffed with what looked like dried straw and fabric scraps, shaped crudely into a human form. Every bunk had one. Like someone had taken the time to fill the beds with false soldiers. Tyler laughed it off, but his voice cracked. Creepy art project, right? Somebody came down here after they shut it down and made these. But Ava shook her head. Her voice was barely above a whisper. No. Look at them. The dog tags are real. The boots are real. Whoever made these, they were using what was left behind. We didn't stay in that room long. None of us could shake the feeling that the straw men were watching us, even without eyes. As we went deeper, the passages grew narrower, the walls pressing in, the ceilings dripping with condensation. The lights that once lined the hallways were shattered, wires hanging down like vines. We passed through blast doors, each one heavier than the last, until finally we found what Mason had been looking for, the operations center. It was a cavernous room, filled with consoles, old computers, and wall maps yellowed with age. Dust coated everything, but strangely, the floor looked disturbed, as though someone, or something, had been moving around recently. Leah pointed to the far wall. A message had been scrawled there in something dark and smeared. At first, I thought it was paint, but the smell told me otherwise. The words were jagged, uneven, as though written in desperation. "We are still here." The room seemed to shrink around us, the air pressing down until it was hard to breathe. That's when we heard it. A sound, faint at first, drifting through the corridors. A low, guttural moan, followed by the distinct drag of something heavy across concrete. Tyler swung his camera toward the sound, whispering excitedly, "Did you guys hear that? Tell me you heard that." We all heard it. The sound grew louder, closer. Not footsteps, something slower, uneven, like whatever was moving wasn't built to walk right. Our flashlights swept across the operations room, bouncing wildly as panic settled in. Mason, ever the leader, hissed for us to hide. We ducked behind the consoles, hearts hammering in our throats, breaths shallow as the noise grew louder. And then, through the broken doorway, something entered the room. I didn't see it clearly at first, only the outline, tall and hunched, its movements jerky, unnatural. It dragged something with it, the sound of metal scraping stone echoing like nails on a chalkboard. My flashlight shook in my hand, and when the beam accidentally caught its form, I wished I had never looked. It wasn't a soldier. Not anymore. Its face was hidden behind a gas mask, the glass cracked and smeared with something dark. The uniform hung off its frame in tatters, and its limbs seemed too long, too stiff, as though they had been broken and put back together wrong. In its hand, it clutched a length of chain, the end of which dragged a rusted metal container that screeched with every movement. The thing paused in the center of the room, head tilting unnaturally, as if sniffing the air. The sound that came from behind the mask wasn't breathing, it was wheezing, choking, like something that shouldn't still be alive was trying desperately to cling to existence. Leah's hand found mine in the dark, trembling, squeezing so tightly it hurt. Nobody moved. Nobody dared breathe. The creature dragged its chain across the floor, circling the room slowly, methodically, as if searching for something. For us. When it finally left, the scraping echo fading into the corridors, we didn't move for a long time. Not until the silence returned, crushing and absolute. Mason whispered what we were all thinking but didn't want to admit, "We're not alone down here." And for the first time, I realized something far worse than being trapped underground in a forgotten military base. Something else had never left. Something that was still waiting. Something that had been here all along. The silence after it left was suffocating. None of us spoke, not even Tyler, whose camera light still trembled in his hands. The echo of the chains scraping against concrete clung to the walls long after the creature had disappeared, like a phantom sound playing on repeat inside our heads. Leah's grip on my hand was ice-cold. Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Finally, she whispered, "We should go back. We shouldn't be here." Mason shook his head immediately, though even he didn't sound as sure of himself as before. "We don't even know if the way back is clear. That thing, whatever it is, it could be between us and the hatch." He was right, and the thought made my stomach sink. We were buried under layers of earth and steel. The hatch was the only way out, and if that thing lingered near it, we were trapped. Ava crouched against one of the consoles, her breathing ragged. This isn't just some squatter or freak living underground. Did you see it? Its body wasn't, she cut herself off, shaking her head like even describing it would make it more real. Tyler finally spoke, his voice too loud for the fragile quiet. This is insane. This is perfect. Do you realize what this footage is worth? Nobody's ever filmed anything like this in here before. Mason snapped at him. Are you kidding me right now? That thing wasn't a show. It wasn't for your channel. It was hunting us. But Tyler grinned, manic, adrenaline pulsing through his every word. Exactly. People will lose their minds when they see this. We just need to keep filming. We could be the first. The sharp clang of metal on concrete silenced him instantly. It came from somewhere beyond the doorway. Another drag. Another scrape. The thing hadn't left after all. We doused our flashlights in unison, plunging the room into darkness so complete it felt like drowning. The only glow came from the faint red light on Tyler's camera. My heartbeat was so loud I was sure it would give us away. The dragging grew louder. Closer. The doorframe filled with shadow as the figure returned. My breath caught in my throat as its head tilted toward the sound of our fear. The wheezing grew harsher, like broken lungs gasping behind that cracked mask. And then, silence. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was still there. Waiting. Listening. Every second stretched into eternity. My muscles burned from holding still. Leah trembled against me, biting her lip to keep from crying out. The chain scraped again, but this time softer, like it was being dragged deliberately slow. Teasing. It paced just beyond the doorway, as though it knew we were hiding but was patient enough to wait us out. Then, with a sudden violent crash, it hurled the container it dragged against the wall. The impact rattled the room, dust raining down from the ceiling. Leah stifled a scream against my chest. Ava covered her mouth, eyes wide in terror. The thing growled, a sound that didn't belong to anything human, then turned and lumbered back down the corridor. The scraping receded, echoing into the depths of the base. We sat there in silence until we were sure it was gone. Finally, Mason stood, his voice a low hiss. We need to move. Staying in one place is suicide. But where? Ava asked, her voice cracking. Deeper. That thing is down here. We'll just run right into it. Leah shook her head, her eyes brimming with tears. We can't stay. If it comes back. Tyler lifted his camera like a weapon. We follow it. Film it. If it's real, and it is, then we prove it. Otherwise nobody will ever believe us. I wanted to punch him. But before I could say anything, Mason made the decision for all of us. We head deeper. There might be another exit, a ventilation shaft, something. If we go back the way we came, we risk walking right into it. And so, against every screaming instinct in my body, we pushed farther into the belly of the base. The corridors seemed to grow tighter, the walls bending inward, ceiling lower, air thicker. Our lights flickered weakly against the darkness, showing us glimpses of places we were never meant to see. We passed storage rooms where supplies had rotted into unrecognizable piles. Medical bays with rusted gurneys, their leather straps still buckled as though waiting for patients who never left. In one room, we found a chalkboard covered in strange diagrams, circles, lines, writing that wasn't English. Leah whispered, "These weren't military notes." And she was right. They looked more like rituals. The deeper we went, the more I felt it. A pressure in the air. A presence that wasn't just one creature. It was like the walls themselves were watching, waiting for us to stumble. Eventually, we reached a heavy steel door that stood half open, its hinges groaning as Mason pushed it wider. Beyond was a massive chamber, larger than any we had seen so far. It must have been the warhead storage. The ceiling stretched high above, vanishing into shadow. Rows of rusting missile casings stood like silent sentinels, lined up in eerie formation. Our lights barely reached the far end, but it was enough to see movement. Not one figure. Several. Shapes shifted between the rows of decaying missiles. Figures too tall, too bent, their gas masks cracked, their uniforms rotting away. They moved slowly, dragging limbs that didn't bend the way they should, each one wheezing, each one clutching scraps of chain, metal, or debris. Leah gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth. Ava shook her head violently, whispering, "No, no, no!" Tyler, of course, raised his camera. His voice was a frantic whisper. "This is incredible! Do you see this? There's more than one." The creatures didn't move like men. They shuffled and lurched, their heads twitching at odd angles. Some crawled along the floor, dragging themselves with jerky motions. Others leaned against the missile casings, as though guarding them. We backed away slowly, but the sound of Mason's boot scuffing against concrete betrayed us. Every head turned in unison. The sound they made when they noticed us wasn't a scream. It was worse. A chorus of choking, gurgling cries, like dying soldiers gasping through punctured lungs. They moved. "Fast! Run!" Mason shouted, and we bolted. The chamber erupted in chaos as the thing surged toward us, chains rattling, footsteps pounding against the concrete. Their gas masks gleamed in the beams of our flashlights, fractured reflections of inhuman hunger. We fled back into the corridor, our lights bouncing wildly, shadows leaping around us like predators. Leah stumbled, nearly falling, but I yanked her up and pulled her forward. Behind us, the sound of pursuit grew louder, chains clanging, wheezing cries echoing closer. Tyler laughed as he ran, the insanity of it breaking him. "We got it! It's all on film! This is it, this is—" His words cut off with a strangled scream. I glanced back just in time to see one of the creatures slam into him, dragging him to the floor. The camera clattered away, skidding across the concrete. Tyler's flashlight spun, illuminating the horror as the thing wrapped its chain around his body and began dragging him back into the darkness. His screams echoed until they didn't. Leah shrieked. Ava froze in horror. Mason grabbed us both, forcing us forward. "Move! Don't stop!" We ran until our lungs burned, twisting through corridors that all looked the same. The map in my mind disintegrated, leaving me lost in a labyrinth of steel and shadow. The creatures pursued relentlessly, their wheezes growing louder, their chains scraping closer. Finally, Mason shoved us into a side passage and slammed a rusted hatch shut behind us. The sound of chains clanged against the other side almost instantly, but the hatch held. For now. We collapsed against the walls, gasping for air. Leah sobbed silently, tears streaking her dirt-stained face. Ava stared at the hatch as though sheer terror might break it open. Tyler was gone. His screams still rang in my ears. Mason broke the silence, his voice hoarse but determined. "We can't go back. They're everywhere. We need another way out." Leah shook her head, trembling. "There isn't another way. We're trapped. Oh God, we're trapped down here." I wanted to believe Mason, to cling to his confidence, but deep down I knew she was right. The base had been designed to keep things in, or out. And now we were caught inside. That was when Ava pointed down the passage. "Look." In the distance, faint light glimmered. Not the harsh white of our flashlights, but a soft, unnatural glow. We followed it, cautiously, the air growing colder with each step. The corridor opened into another chamber, smaller than the missile room but no less unsettling. Candles burned in melted pools across the floor, their wax forming grotesque shapes. Symbols were painted on the walls in the same dark substance we had seen before. In the center of the room stood a crude altar, metal slabs welded together, smeared with stains that needed no explanation. And lying across it was a body. Or what was left of one. Tyler. His eyes were wide, mouth frozen in a silent scream. His chest had been opened, torn apart in some grotesque ritual. The chains that bound him were etched with the same strange symbols from the walls. Leah gagged, turning away, while Ava clutched her head as if trying to block the sight from her mind. Mason swore under his breath, rage and terror battling in his eyes. I couldn't look away. Because as horrific as the scene was, something else caught my attention. The walls. The symbols. They weren't random. They were containment markings. Wards. The kind used to bind something in place. And they were broken. The creatures weren't just the remnants of soldiers. They weren't just corpses reanimated by rot and rage. They were guardians. And whatever they had been guarding against was no longer bound. The candles flickered violently, as if stirred by an unseen breath. The air grew impossibly cold. A low hum began to resonate through the chamber, vibrating in my bones. Then, from the shadows behind the altar, something moved. Not one of the gas-masked creatures. Something bigger. Something older. Something that had been waiting for us all along. The movement behind the altar was wrong. Not human, not even close. At first, it was only a shifting shadow, a ripple in the darkness that bent the light of the candles around it. Then it began to emerge, slowly, like it enjoyed our horror. Its shape was vast, too large for the chamber it inhabited. It ducked under the low concrete beams, its form scraping against the walls as though the space itself couldn't contain it. The thing wasn't flesh, not entirely. Parts of it looked human, a hand here, a face there, but warped, fused into something far greater. Its body shimmered like oil slicks in water, its outline constantly changing, shifting as if it hadn't decided what form it wanted to wear. The faces were the worst. Dozens of them, embedded in its skin, mouths open in silent screams, eyes darting wildly as if alive. Tyler's face was among them now, his frozen scream stretched across the black surface of the thing's chest. Leah screamed. Ava crumpled to her knees, covering her eyes, shaking her head as if refusing reality. Mason grabbed my arm, dragging me back. His voice was hoarse with panic. "Don't look at it! Move now!" But it was impossible not to look. Its presence was overwhelming, pressing down on us with invisible weight. The air grew thick, vibrating with a low hum that made my teeth ache. The candles sputtered as if suffocating in its aura. Then it spoke. Not with a single voice, but with many. The mouths on its body opened, and a chorus of whispers poured out, layered over one another. They spoke in languages I didn't understand, Russian, German, English, but the meaning sank into my bones regardless. "We are bound no longer." Leah clutched my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "What is it? Oh God, what is it?" Mason, ever desperate to take control, shook his head violently. "It doesn't matter. We're leaving. Now." He yanked us toward the corridor, but the thing moved faster than anything that size should. Its shifting mass surged forward, tendrils of black flesh whipping across the chamber, slamming into the walls and cutting off our path. The concrete groaned under the impact, dust showering down from the ceiling. The voices rose in volume, overlapping, drilling into our skulls. "You opened the door. You broke the circle. You set us free." Ava screamed, her voice raw. "It's not just one. It's all of them. The soldiers, the ones who died here, it's them. It's their souls." And I realized she was right. The gas-masked figures weren't monsters in their own right. They were husks, puppets, bound by chains and symbols to keep this greater horror locked away. The wards had failed, the ritual had collapsed, and now the thing had escaped its prison. The entity lashed out, one massive arm crashing across the altar and scattering candles in a spray of wax. The flames went out, plunging us into darkness except for our flashlights, which flickered weakly against the tide of shadow. Mason shoved Leah and me ahead. "Run. Go." We bolted down a side passage, the sound of Ava's sobs echoing behind us. The walls shook as the thing pursued, its movements heavy and deliberate, like a predator toying with its prey. The corridor twisted endlessly, but no matter how far we ran, the hum of the voices never faded. They filled the air, seeping into our minds. I heard my name whispered from behind me, felt phantom fingers brush against my neck. Leah tripped, nearly falling, and when I pulled her up, she stared at me with wide, glassy eyes. "I heard my brother," she whispered. "He's dead, but I heard him." The entity wasn't just chasing us. It was inside us. It knew our memories, our grief, our fears, and it used them like weapons. Finally, we burst into another chamber, smaller, circular, lined with rusting machinery. Control panels covered in dials and levers stood dead and silent. In the center was a massive table, maps and documents still scattered across it, yellowed with time. We slammed the door shut behind us, bracing it with whatever debris we could find. The booming steps of the thing reverberated through the walls, but for now, it didn't force its way inside. Leah collapsed against the wall, sobbing. Ava sat on the floor, rocking back and forth, whispering prayers. Mason stood rigid, gripping a rusted metal pipe like a weapon, though we all knew it was useless. I tried to breathe, to think, but the whispers still filled the room. They came from the documents, from the very walls, as if the entire base was infected with the entity's presence. I grabbed one of the papers, scanning it desperately. It wasn't in English, but parts had been translated. Notes scrawled in frantic handwriting covered the margins. Phrases leapt out. Asterisk, containment breached. Asterisk, asterisk, sacrifices insufficient. Asterisk, asterisk, the voices demand more. Asterisk, and then, underlined 3 times. Asterisk, do not let them leave the base. Asterisk, my heart sank. This wasn't just an abandoned military site. It was a prison. They hadn't decommissioned it because of structural instability. They had sealed it to keep the entity locked inside. And now we were the intruders who had broken the locks. The door rattled violently. A deep groan echoed through the chamber as the thing pressed against it. The concrete around the frame cracked, dust sifting down. Leah screamed. Ava curled tighter into herself. Mason raised the pipe like he could fight the darkness itself. But then, just as suddenly, the pressure stopped. Silence. We waited, breaths shallow, until Mason slowly moved to the door and pressed his ear against it. He frowned. It's gone. But I knew it wasn't gone. Not really. It didn't need to break the door. It had already seeped into us. The whispers grew louder inside my head, weaving through my thoughts like vines strangling a tree. They whispered promises, bargains, lies. Open the door and live. Offer one, save the rest. You cannot all leave. Choose. I shook my head violently, clutching my temples. Don't listen. It's trying to trick us. But when I looked up, Mason's face was pale and drawn, his eyes darting between Leah, Ava, and me. His grip on the pipe tightened. Don't you dare, I hissed. Don't you dare think like that. Leah's sobs filled the silence. Ava looked up, eyes bloodshot. It doesn't matter. Even if we make it out of this room, we can't escape. Not with that thing loose. Her words sank in like ice. She was right. We were rats in a maze with no exit. Every corridor led deeper, every hatch sealed tighter. Even if we somehow reached the surface, what then? We'd unleashed something that was never meant to be free. The entity's whispers shifted tone, no longer bargaining but mocking. You thought we were soldiers. You thought we were human. We are older than your wars. We were here long before. The faces on its body weren't just soldiers. They were everyone who had ever come down here. Every soul foolish enough to trespass had been absorbed, their essence added to the choir. And we were next. The ground shook. The lights above us flickered. The sound of chains rattling echoed faintly down the corridor outside. The guardians were coming. Ava stood suddenly, her voice trembling but resolute. They weren't just keeping it in. They were feeding it. Sacrifices, rituals, anything to keep it sated. That's why it hasn't broken out in decades. Mason swore. You're saying we have to. I'm saying it wants blood, Ava cut in, her voice hard now. It always has. It doesn't care who. Leah shook her head violently. No. We're not doing that. We're not, we can't. But the whispers in my head grew louder, more insistent. I could feel it pressing against my mind, against my will, planting seeds of violence. Mason's knuckles whitened around the pipe. His eyes flicked between us again, torn between survival and morality. And then, without warning, the door burst inward. The guardians flooded the room, their gas masks gleaming, their wheezing cries filling the air. Chains whipped against the floor as they surged toward us. Mason swung the pipe, striking one across the mask. The blow did nothing. The thing grabbed him with inhuman strength, dragging him backward as he screamed. Leah lunged for him, but I held her back. His shouts turned to gurgles as the chain wrapped around his throat, pulling him into the swarm. Leah shrieked his name, but it was too late. Mason was gone. The guardians didn't stop. They pressed into the room, forcing us against the wall. Their cracked masks tilted toward us, their wheezing breaths choking the air. But then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they stopped. Frozen. And I understood why. The entity had arrived. It filled the doorway, its shifting mass blotting out the corridor beyond. The guardians stepped aside, bowing their broken forms, their chains clattering in reverence. The faces on its body writhed, mouths opening in unison. And the voices spoke again. 3 remain. 1 must stay. The others may go. The meaning was clear. It demanded a sacrifice. Leah clung to me, her body trembling. Ava stared at the floor, lips moving silently as she whispered the same word over and over. No, no, no. The entity waited, patient, its countless eyes watching, its whispers tightening like a noose around our minds. It wasn't giving us a choice. It was giving us a command. The metal groaned as if the entire base had taken a breath. It wasn't the sound of pipes expanding or the hum of failing machinery. This was deep, resonant, and alive. Mason froze mid-step, his flashlight shaking in his grip, the beam cutting across walls scarred with claw marks we hadn't noticed before. They weren't scratches from tools or rust eating at the metal. They were gouges, long and jagged, as if something had dragged nails through steel with ease. "We need to move," I whispered, but Mason didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the shadows at the far end of the corridor. There was movement, just beyond the reach of our light. Something crawling, but not on hands and feet. Something that seemed to drag itself with an unnatural rhythm, as though every limb was fighting the idea of being attached to a body at all. Then it stopped. Silence pressed against us, so suffocating that even our breaths felt like blasphemy. And then, slowly, deliberately, 2 points of red light blinked open in the dark. Not reflections, not a trick of the flashlight. Eyes. I grabbed Mason's arm, but he didn't move. His lips parted as if he were about to speak, but only a faint, trembling exhale came out. The eyes didn't blink. They only stared, wide and glowing, as the sound of scraping metal filled the hall again. We stumbled back into the operations room, slamming the door shut, though every instinct screamed that thin steel wouldn't save us. Inside, the others were crouched in silence, listening. No one asked what we'd seen. No one had to. The scratching outside, slow and deliberate, spoke louder than any words. Hannah pulled something from her pack, a half-crushed flare. She cracked it, and crimson light filled the room, painting our faces in desperate hues. The glow made the walls seem closer, the shadows sharper. But for the first time, I saw fear on her face. True fear. "There's something in here with us," she said flatly. "And it knows we're cornered." Mason shook his head violently, pacing, whispering to himself like a man on the edge of unraveling. "No, no, no, we were supposed to come in, check it out, document. It wasn't supposed to be like this. It wasn't supposed to be real." Then came the laughter. Not loud, not manic, just soft, like someone chuckling under their breath right outside the door. It wasn't one voice, it was many, layered and overlapping, each just slightly out of sync with the others. We pressed ourselves against the walls, clutching whatever improvised weapons we could find. Pipes, broken tools, even a jagged piece of metal I ripped from the console. The door handle twitched. Once. Twice. Then slowly, deliberately, it turned. We didn't wait to see what came next. Hannah shoved a rusted cabinet in front of the door while Mason and I bolted toward the far wall. That was when Hannah noticed it, a hatch beneath the console. A maintenance tunnel, half buried under decades of dust and neglect. We pried it open, coughing as a wave of foul, stale air poured out. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for us to crawl through, but it was better than waiting for whatever was outside to come in. One by one, we dropped inside, pulling the hatch closed behind us. Darkness swallowed us whole, broken only by the faint, sickly glow of the dying flare Hannah carried. The tunnel walls were damp, streaked with something that looked like mold, but as I ran my hand across it to steady myself, I felt grooves. Patterns. Writing. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language I knew. The lines curved and twisted in ways that made my stomach turn, as if they weren't meant for human eyes. And among them, smeared in faded, dried brown, were handprints. Not all of them were human. We crawled deeper, the air growing heavier, colder. Behind us, the sound of the hatch creaking open echoed down the tunnel. Then came the scratching again. Only this time, it was inside with us. Hannah hissed for silence, her flare casting frantic shadows across the tunnel. Mason's breath grew ragged, and I realized he was no longer crawling forward. He was frozen, eyes wide, staring at the wall. His lips trembled as he mouthed words none of us could hear. I grabbed his shoulder, shaking him, but his skin was cold, clammy. He turned his head toward me, and I swear for a moment, just a flicker, his eyes weren't his own. They glowed faintly red, reflecting the flare. Then he blinked, and it was gone. Something skittered ahead of us, deeper into the tunnel. We weren't alone. And for the first time since entering the base, I wondered if the creatures here weren't just hunting us, but changing us. The silence after Lieutenant Rhodes' final act was not the kind of silence that brings peace. It was hollow, echoing through the base's concrete corridors like the aftermath of a grave being sealed shut. For a moment, there was nothing. No pounding footsteps of the creature, no rattling pipes, no distorted hum of machinery awakening in the dark. Only the stillness of the underground tomb that had swallowed us whole. I stood there, barely able to comprehend what had just happened. Rhodes, the strongest of us, the one who had taken charge, who had carried the weight of decisions when the rest of us faltered, was gone. His body had crumpled to the ground, his last breath still lingering in the frigid air. The weapon he had used, the experimental prototype we had found in the lab, lay glowing faintly beside him, its energy spent. Danielle clutched my arm so tightly her nails dug into my skin. Her breathing came in uneven, desperate gasps. He saved us," she whispered, her voice breaking. But even as she said it, we both knew the truth. Sacrifice in this place didn't mean salvation. It only meant a temporary delay. The base wasn't finished with us. Somewhere in the deeper tunnels, a low groan stirred, vibrating through the steel and stone. It was a sound that made my blood run cold, not because it was deafening, but because it was unmistakably alive. And it was coming closer. "We can't stay," I said, forcing myself to move, to shake off the paralysis threatening to root me to the ground. Rhodes knew that. He bought us time, but if we don't get out now, it's for nothing. Danielle's eyes were glassy, shimmering in the dim red emergency lights. She hesitated, looking down at Rhodes' body as if torn between grief and survival. But then, with a shaky nod, she followed me. We turned our backs on the fallen lieutenant and pressed onward, deeper into the corridors, searching for the elusive exit that had haunted us since the beginning. The map etched into my memory from earlier was unreliable. The layout of the base shifted in ways that defied reason. Corridors looped back, doors that had once led to storage now opened into stairwells, and stairwells ended in blank concrete walls. It was as if the structure itself was alive, twisting and reshaping to keep us trapped. And yet, amid the chaos, patterns began to emerge. The markings we'd seen, cryptic chalk symbols scrawled along the walls, seemed to guide us. At first, I thought they were warnings left by the scientists who once inhabited the base. But the more I studied them, the more I realized they were directional. They pointed the way forward, sometimes subtly, sometimes explicitly. A triangle scratched into a rusted doorframe. An arrow carved into the metal floor grating. A circle surrounding a handprint, smeared in something long dried. Who, or what, had left these symbols? Survivors who came before us? Or something that wanted us to move exactly where it wanted? We followed anyway. The deeper we went, the stranger the air became. It carried a metallic tang that burned in the throat, mixed with a faint sweetness that reminded me disturbingly of rotting fruit. My head began to throb with each step, as though something was pressing inward against my skull. Danielle stumbled once, catching herself against the wall, muttering that her vision was swimming. I didn't tell her that mine was too. At last, we reached a chamber unlike any other we had seen. It was circular, the walls lined with dormant screens and control panels. In the center stood a cylindrical glass pod, cracked and leaking faint wisps of vapor. Around it, the floor was scorched, melted in a jagged ring, as though something powerful had been unleashed here. I approached cautiously, the echo of my boots sharp in the vast room. Inside the pod, what remained of a body lay slumped against the glass. Its features were twisted, half human, half something else entirely. Skin stretched and bubbled in unnatural patterns. Eyes too large for the sockets stared out, lifeless yet uncomfortably aware. Danielle covered her mouth, suppressing a gag. Oh God! They were experimenting on people. And then, before I could respond, the lights above flickered. The screens that had been dead for decades suddenly burst to life, static pouring across them. Amid the static, fragmented images appeared. Scientists in hazmat suits, frantic notes scrawled on clipboards, test subjects screaming behind reinforced glass. One phrase repeated across every screen, in white letters against the distortion: containment failure. A deep rumble shook the chamber. Danielle grabbed my arm again, her eyes wide. It's here. From the far corridor, the sound came, the scraping, the guttural growl, the heavy, unnatural dragging of something that did not move like a man. It was close now. Too close. Panic surged through me. My eyes darted around the chamber for another exit, and there, half hidden behind a collapsed console, was a maintenance hatch. Small, narrow, but open. A faint breeze wafted from within, carrying a trace of fresh air. "Danielle there!" I shouted. We sprinted, stumbling over debris, hearts pounding as the creature's steps grew louder. I didn't dare look back. We threw ourselves into the hatch, the sharp edges of the metal scraping our arms as we squeezed inside. The tunnel beyond was cramped, barely wide enough to crawl through. Behind us, something slammed into the chamber. The walls reverberated with its impact. A screech, inhuman, piercing, echoed into the tunnel, followed by the sickening crunch of glass shattering. The pod had opened. We crawled as fast as we could, our breaths ragged, the tunnel pressing in on us from all sides. It twisted and turned, descending deeper, then rising again. I lost track of direction. Time itself seemed to blur, each second stretching into eternity. At last, the tunnel spilled out into a cavernous space, a forgotten section of the base, carved directly into the bedrock. Massive support beams jutted from the floor and ceiling, and at the far end, a staircase ascended toward a sealed blast door. Danielle's face lit with desperate hope. That has to be it. The exit. But before we could take a step, the ground trembled. From the shadows above, the creature emerged. It was no longer the misshapen form we had glimpsed before. It had grown. Expanded. Its body was a patchwork of human and something else, a grotesque amalgamation of flesh and machinery fused by radiation and time. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, its limbs unnaturally long, bending wrong. And yet, as it moved, I recognized something in its face. A trace of humanity. It had once been one of them, the scientists. The realization hit me like a blow. This wasn't just some monster. It was the result of everything they had done here. It was their legacy, their failure, their warning. And now it wanted us. Danielle screamed as it lunged, but I shoved her toward the stairs. "Go!" I yelled. We scrambled upward, the creature slamming against the supports behind us. The entire cavern shuddered, chunks of concrete and steel raining down. We reached the blast door, and for one terrible moment, I thought it would be sealed like all the others. But a panel beside it glowed faintly. I slammed my hand against it, praying. The door groaned, ancient gears grinding, and began to open. The creature shrieked, barreling toward us, its massive form tearing through the collapsing structure. The gap widened just enough, and I shoved Danielle through. As I followed, a clawed hand swiped, catching my leg. Pain exploded, white-hot, but momentum carried me through the gap just as the door sealed behind us with a thunderous boom. Silence. We collapsed on the other side, gasping for breath, tears streaming down our faces. The corridor we had entered was different. Clean. Lit. Maintained. It wasn't part of the decommissioned base, it was something newer. Something still in use. Danielle's voice trembled. We made it. We made it out. But as I looked around, unease gnawed at me. Cameras lined the walls. A faint hum of electricity filled the air. This wasn't freedom. This was another section of the facility, one we were never meant to see. And then, from hidden speakers overhead, a voice crackled to life. Calm. Measured. Almost welcoming. Welcome to Phase 2. The lights dimmed, and the corridor ahead stretched into darkness. We hadn't escaped. We had only stepped deeper into their experiment.